In a Peruvian desert, researchers stumbled on something that changed everything we thought we knew about the ancient ocean. It wasn't a dinosaur, it wasn't a sea monster from mythology, it was a whale, but not like any whale alive today. Its skull alone was the length of a car, its teeth, and it had them in both its upper and lower jaws, were longer than your forearm. Scientists called them the largest functional teeth of any animal ever found on Earth. This wasn't a filter feeder. This wasn't something that swam away from danger. This was Livyatan, and about 10 million years ago, it was the most terrifying thing in the ocean. Not because it was big. Plenty of things were big, because it hunted the big things. Other whales, animals the size of buses, weren't safe. The ocean back then wasn't organized the way we imagine it. It wasn't a place where size bought you protection. Size just made you worth the effort. In today's story, we travel back 10 million years to the oceans that no longer exist to meet the Livyatan. Time itself stretches differently across the layers of the ocean, and in this distant chapter of Earth's history, the rhythms of life moved through a world not yet settled into stable patterns. Between roughly 5 to 23 million years ago, during the Miocene epoch, the seas carried a quiet abundance that touched nearly every depth. Warm currents moved freely across the planet, unbroken by the colder divisions that would come later, and coastlines extended far beyond their present boundaries, forming wide, shallow basins where sunlight reached easily into the water. These spaces became vast nurseries of life, where energy flowed steadily from microscopic producers upward into increasingly larger forms. Within this expansive system, marine mammals found opportunities to expand into new roles. Early whales, already shaped by millions of years of adaptation, began to diversify in ways that would redefine their presence in the ocean. Some grew longer and more streamlined, suited for sustained travel through open water, while others developed broader skulls and specialized feeding structures that allowed them to process immense quantities of small prey. The boundaries between ecological roles were still fluid, and forms overlapped in ways that would later separate into more defined niches. The warmth of the Miocene seas supported dense populations of plankton, which in turn sustained large aggregations of krill and small fish. This abundance created a foundation capable of supporting animals of increasing size, and over time, bodies grew to match the scale of available energy. Whales became not only larger but more numerous, their presence shaping the distribution of resources around them. Movement through the water began to carry new significance, as migration routes formed in response to seasonal shifts in productivity, drawing immense groups across entire ocean basins. Yet within this richness, a subtle tension persisted. The same conditions that allowed life to flourish also encouraged competition to intensify. As more species occupied overlapping spaces, the balance between them remained delicate, never fixed for long. Feeding grounds that once seemed limitless began to host multiple forms, seeking the same resources, each adapted in slightly different ways, yet bound to the same underlying cycle of consumption and renewal. Predation, too, followed this expansion. With larger prey came the gradual emergence of hunters capable of targeting them. The structure of the ecosystem began to reflect this change, as energy no longer moved only upward through passive feeding, but also through direct pursuit and capture. The presence of large-bodied animals created opportunities that had not existed before, and certain lineages began to shift toward exploiting them. In this evolving ocean, early whales occupied a range of strategies, some still relying on filtering vast quantities of small organisms, others experimenting with more active feeding behaviors. The diversity of forms suggested a system still in motion, where evolutionary pathways remained open and responsive to the pressures surrounding them. No single design dominated completely, and no single strategy guaranteed long-term stability. Currents carried nutrients across great distances, linking distant regions into a shared network of productivity. Along continental shelves, shallow seas fostered dense communities where interactions between species occurred constantly, shaping behavior and form through repeated contact. Farther offshore, deeper waters held their own layers of activity, connected yet distinct, each contributing to the broader structure of the ocean. Through it all, the Miocene world maintained an appearance of quiet continuity, yet beneath that surface lay a system still searching for equilibrium. Life expanded, adapted, and pressed against its own limits, setting the stage for further changes that would gradually reshape the ocean into something more defined, though never entirely at rest. A slow accumulation of small lives began to shape something far larger than itself, as drifting clouds of plankton gathered in quiet abundance beneath the surface. These microscopic organisms, suspended within shifting currents, formed dense fields of nourishment that spread across vast stretches of ocean. In their presence, a new path opened for certain whales, one that did not depend on pursuit or sudden movement, but on patience and scale. Early baleen whales emerged within this setting, their bodies gradually transforming to harvest what seemed almost invisible when viewed alone, yet immense when taken together. Their mouths grew broader, their skulls widening to support structures, unlike teeth, composed instead of fibrous plates that could strain enormous volumes of water. With each slow pass through these concentrated feeding grounds, they captured countless small organisms, converting dispersed energy into concentrated mass. The act itself carried a quiet efficiency, a rhythm that matched the steady drift of the ocean rather than resisting it. Over time, this method allowed them to grow beyond the limits faced by other marine animals, their size no longer constrained by the need to chase individual prey. As generations passed, this transformation deepened. Bodies lengthened and thickened, supported by buoyant water and sustained by continuous access to rich feeding zones. The relationship between plankton blooms and whale movement became increasingly synchronized, guiding migrations that followed the shifting patterns of productivity. Entire populations moved in response to subtle changes in temperature and nutrient flow, tracing invisible pathways across the ocean that connected distant regions into a single, living system. With increasing size came a new presence within the marine environment. These whales carried immense reserves of energy within their bodies, not only in muscle, but in layers of stored fat that supported long journeys and periods between feeding. Their scale altered the dynamics of the ocean around them, influencing how resources were distributed and how other species interacted with their surroundings. Smaller organisms gathered in their wake, while larger animals began to recognize the significance of such concentrated living mass. In this expanding landscape of abundance, the existence of such large bodies introduced a new possibility. Where once energy had been dispersed among countless small forms, it now existed in singular, substantial organisms. The ocean, in its quiet continuity, had begun to produce creatures that could serve as both consumers and sources, bridging different levels of the food web in a single form. This shift did not occur abruptly, but unfolded gradually, shaped by countless interactions across generations. The rise of these giants also influenced the pace of evolution in other lineages. As large whales became more common, the ecological space around them began to change, creating opportunities for species that could interact with them in new ways. Their movements stirred the water, redistributing nutrients vertically and horizontally, subtly altering the productivity of entire regions. Even after passing through an area, their presence lingered in the form of enriched environments that supported further growth. Yet their size, while offering advantages in travel and endurance, carried its own quiet consequences. The very mass that allowed them to thrive also made them visible within the vastness of the ocean, their silhouettes distinct against the shifting light above and the darker depths below. They moved with a steady grace, but their scale ensured that they could not easily disappear. Across the Miocene seas, more and more of these immense whales came to occupy the waters, each one a reflection of the abundant systems that sustained them. Their existence marked a turning point, where the ocean's capacity to support life had expanded into forms of unprecedented size. In their presence, the balance between growth and vulnerability began to take on new meaning, as the ocean quietly filled with creatures large enough to reshape the pathways of energy itself. Pressure does not always arrive as a sudden force, but as a steady, shaping influence that guides bodies toward new forms over long spans of time. In the Miocene seas, that pressure began to gather around the growing presence of large prey, and with it came a quiet shift in the design of those that hunted. What had once been sufficient for smaller pursuits no longer matched the scale of opportunity now moving through the water. Gradually, certain predators began to change, their bodies adjusting to meet a world where size itself had become a defining feature. Among the earliest to follow this path were sharks, descendants of ancient lineages that had already proven their adaptability across countless environments. Within these evolving forms, some began to grow far beyond the limits of their predecessors. Their skeletons, composed of cartilage yet reinforced through structure and proportion, supported increasingly massive bodies. Teeth broadened and thickened, their edges serrated with fine precision, capable of cutting through dense tissue with minimal resistance. Each replacement tooth carried the same design, ensuring that wear did not diminish their effectiveness over time. These sharks did not simply become larger, they became more capable of interacting with prey that required both power and endurance to subdue. Their swimming patterns reflected this shift, balancing bursts of speed with the ability to cover long distances. The ocean, once filled with dispersed feeding interactions, now held encounters defined by momentum and impact. Through this transformation, early relatives of what would later be known as Megalodon began to take shape, not yet at their full scale, but already aligned with a trajectory that favored magnitude. At the same time, a different lineage moved along its own path of refinement. Toothed whales, distinct from their filter-feeding relatives, began to develop traits suited for active predation on larger animals. Their skulls elongated and strengthened, creating anchor points for powerful muscles that controlled the jaw. Teeth became more uniform in shape, conical and robust, designed not for slicing but for gripping and holding. This adaptation allowed them to seize prey that resisted with significant force, maintaining control through sustained pressure rather than a single cutting motion. Their senses evolved alongside these physical changes. Sound became a primary tool for navigating and locating movement within the water, allowing them to perceive their surroundings with a precision that extended beyond sight. This ability to interpret returning echoes provided a continuous awareness of distance and form, enabling them to track targets across open space without relying on visual cues alone. Movement patterns adjusted accordingly, combining bursts of acceleration with calculated positioning, aligning body and intention into a single, coordinated act. As both sharks and toothed whales expanded in size and capability, the interactions between predator and prey began to intensify. Larger bodies required more energy, and with that requirement came a need for increasingly substantial meals. The presence of giant whales offered such resources, but accessing them demanded strength, coordination, and persistence. Evolution, guided by these pressures, began to favor those individuals capable of exerting greater force, those whose bite could withstand the resistance of large living mass. Over successive generations, this pattern repeated. Incremental advantages accumulated, shaping entire populations toward greater size and power. The ocean did not shift abruptly, but through a continuous process of refinement, where each change built upon the last. Predators grew more formidable, and in response, the dynamics of survival adjusted across the ecosystem. Within this gradual escalation, a subtle balance persisted, not of stability, but of ongoing adaptation. Strength met resistance, and resistance in turn influenced strength, creating a cycle that moved without pause. The Miocene seas, once defined by expansion and abundance, now carried an additional layer of interaction, where the scale of life itself guided the direction of its evolution, shaping a world where size, force, and persistence became central to survival. Structure begins to reveal intention long before behavior is ever witnessed, and within the bodies of these evolving whales, subtle differences began to trace entirely separate paths through the same ocean. Beneath the surface, form followed function with quiet precision, shaping each lineage according to the demands placed upon it. Where some whales carried wide arches of bone that supported vast filtering systems, others developed narrower, reinforced skulls, their geometry aligned not with gathering but with seizing. In the filter feeders, the upper jaw curved gently outward, creating space for rows of baleen that hung like layered fringes within the mouth. These plates, flexible yet durable, worked in unison with the tongue, which pressed water outward while trapping small organisms within. The skull itself accommodated this process, its structure broad and relatively lightweight, designed to support expansion rather than resist impact. Feeding became a continuous act of filtration, a slow harvesting of countless small lives suspended within the water. In contrast, toothed whales followed a different pattern. Their jaws did not widen to hold filtering structures, but instead narrowed and strengthened, forming a framework capable of withstanding force. Teeth emerged along both the upper and lower jaws, each one conical and deeply rooted, spaced in a way that allowed them to interlock when the mouth closed. This arrangement did not slice or strain, it held. Once contact was made, escape became increasingly difficult, as pressure could be maintained through the full strength of the jaw. The teeth themselves carried information about diet and behavior. In filter feeders, teeth were either reduced or absent, replaced entirely by baleen. In toothed whales, they remained prominent, their surfaces smooth and rounded rather than serrated, indicating a method of capture based on gripping rather than cutting. Wear patterns along these teeth suggested repeated contact with large, resisting prey, the enamel-bearing marks that reflected sustained interaction rather than a single decisive strike. Skull structure deepened this distinction. In active predators, the bones surrounding the jaw joint thickened, providing anchorage for powerful muscles capable of generating significant bite force. The temporal region expanded, allowing greater leverage as the jaws closed, while the alignment of the snout directed force forward with minimal loss. These changes were not abrupt, but accumulated over generations, each adjustment refining the ability to interact with prey that demanded strength to subdue. Within the nasal passages and upper skull, further specialization emerged. Spaces adapted to channel sound became more defined, supporting the use of echolocation as a means of perceiving the environment. This system, integrated into the very structure of the head, allowed toothed whales to detect movement and form at a distance, guiding their actions with a level of precision that complemented their physical adaptations. The skull became not only a tool of force, but also of perception, merging sensory input with mechanical output. Even the neck, though externally subtle, reflected these changes. Vertebrae in predatory whales often showed increased rigidity, limiting flexibility but enhancing stability during forceful interactions. When engaging with large prey, maintaining alignment between head and body allowed energy to transfer efficiently through the jaws, reducing strain and increasing control. Each element of the anatomy contributed to a unified function where strength, structure, and awareness operated together. Across these forms, the divergence between feeding strategies became increasingly clear. One lineage expanded into a role defined by scale and efficiency, filtering the ocean itself for sustenance, while another refined its capacity to engage directly with individual organisms of significant size. Neither path existed in isolation, yet their differences shaped the broader structure of the ecosystem, influencing how energy moved and how interactions unfolded. In the quiet accumulation of bone and tooth, early signs of a more active form of predation took shape. These whales did not abandon their origins, but adapted them, transforming inherited structures into new tools suited for a changing world. Through gradual modification, their bodies recorded the transition, leaving behind a pattern that would continue to evolve as the pressures of the ocean guided them forward. Not all transformations unfold in gradual increments that remain easily traced, and within this shifting ocean, a lineage emerged that seemed to gather multiple changes into a single, striking form. Among the growing diversity of whales, a group appeared whose features no longer suggested passive feeding or gentle adaptation, but something far more direct in purpose. These were the macro-raptorial sperm whales, a rare branch that diverged from familiar patterns and carried with them a different approach to survival. Their presence could be read first through the symmetry of their jaws. Unlike modern sperm whales, whose lower teeth meet a largely toothless upper jaw, these whales possessed large, functional teeth along both margins. When their mouths closed, the upper and lower rows aligned in a way that created a firm, enclosing grip. Each tooth was substantial, anchored deeply within the bone, capable of withstanding repeated stress without fracture. This arrangement suggested a method of feeding that depended not on suction or engulfing, but on direct contact with prey that resisted and struggled. The skull itself reflected this change with quiet clarity. It remained large, as expected of sperm whales, yet its proportions emphasized strength and leverage rather than the internal spaces associated with deep-diving specialists. The snout extended forward with purpose, and the bones surrounding the jaw joint appeared reinforced, forming a stable foundation for powerful bites. Musculature attached across these regions would have been capable of generating significant force, translating movement into sustained pressure that could be applied without hesitation. Within this structure, the role of the teeth became central. Their size and shape indicated an ability to penetrate and hold rather than simply grasp. Surfaces showed patterns consistent with repeated engagement against dense tissue, suggesting that prey was not consumed whole or drawn inward through suction, but actively subdued before being torn apart. The feeding process itself would have involved movement, adjustment, and persistence, each action guided by both strength and coordination. This shift also implied a different interaction with the surrounding environment. Where suction feeding relies on drawing prey into the mouth with rapid expansion, macro-raptorial sperm whales required proximity and alignment. They would have approached their targets with intention, closing distance before committing to contact. The body, therefore, needed to support not only force but also control, allowing for precise positioning during the final moments of an encounter. Sensory systems remained integral to this process. As members of the sperm whale lineage, they likely retained advanced acoustic capabilities, using sound to detect and track movement within the water. This ability would have complemented their physical adaptations, guiding them toward prey even when visibility was limited. The coordination between perception and action became more tightly linked, forming a continuous loop where detection led directly to engagement. Among this group, one form would later be recognized as particularly distinct. Livyatan, known from fossil remains, embodied the extreme of these adaptations. Its skull reached lengths that rivaled the largest whales of its time, and its teeth stood among the most massive ever recorded in any animal. Yet it was not only the scale of these features that set it apart, but the coherence of their design, each element contributing to a singular mode of predation. Within the broader context of the Miocene seas, the emergence of macro-raptorial sperm whales marked a moment where evolutionary pathways converged toward a shared outcome. Size, strength, and sensory precision aligned within a single lineage, producing animals capable of interacting with prey on a scale that had only recently become possible. They did not replace earlier forms, but existed alongside them, adding another layer to an already complex system. As these whales moved through the water, their form carried the imprint of a world still in transition. They represented not an endpoint, but a direction, a way of inhabiting the ocean that drew upon both inherited traits and newly refined capabilities. In their structure, the shift toward active predation became unmistakable, recorded in bone and tooth as clearly as any trace left behind in the sediment below. Long after the motion of those ancient seas had settled into silence, the record of their inhabitants remained hidden within layers of stone, pressed slowly into form beneath shifting ground. Along the coast of what is now Peru, exposed sediments began to reveal fragments that did not immediately resolve into anything familiar. Bone emerged not as a complete shape, but as sections, surfaces, and textures that hinted at something immense once moving through water that no longer existed. As excavation continued, the outline of a skull began to take shape, its scale becoming apparent not through a single glance, but through the steady accumulation of measured pieces. The structure extended beyond what is typically expected of a whale's head, reaching lengths of over 3 meters. Its proportions suggested both mass and purpose, with broad regions that indicated muscle attachment and dense bone arranged to support significant force. Even incomplete, the skull carried a presence that could not be easily compared to modern forms. Set within this framework were the teeth, each one substantial enough to stand apart as an object of interest on its own. Their size alone distinguished them, some exceeding 30 centimeters in length, with thick enamel surfaces that reflected a design built for repeated impact. Unlike the reduced or specialized dentition seen in many whales, these teeth were both numerous and functional, positioned in a way that suggested active engagement rather than passive intake. They did not taper delicately, but maintained a solidity from base to tip, reinforcing the idea that they interacted directly with resistant material. The surrounding sediments provided further context. These fossils were not isolated within barren rock, but embedded within deposits rich with other marine remains, indicating a once active environment where multiple species coexisted. Fragments of other whales, along with various marine organisms, lay within the same layers, offering a quiet record of an ecosystem where interactions were frequent and varied. Within this setting, the remains of this particular whale stood apart, not only in scale but in the nature of its construction. As researchers examined the skull more closely, the arrangement of its features began to clarify its place within the broader lineage of sperm whales, yet its differences were equally pronounced. The upper and lower jaws both held large, functional teeth, a trait absent in modern relatives. The alignment of these teeth, combined with the reinforced structure of the jaw, indicated a feeding strategy centered on grasping and holding rather than drawing prey inward through suction. The skull itself appeared adapted to withstand stresses associated with forceful encounters, its geometry reflecting a balance between strength and control. Naming this creature required recognition of both its physical characteristics and the impression it left upon those who studied it. The name Livyatan was chosen, drawn from the ancient reference to a powerful sea being described in early texts. This connection was not made lightly, but reflected the scale and apparent capability suggested by the fossil remains. The name carried with it an acknowledgement of something that once moved through the ocean with a presence difficult to fully reconstruct, yet unmistakable in its implications. Through careful analysis, each element of the fossil contributed to a clearer understanding of the animal it once formed. Measurements, comparisons, and reconstructions allowed the fragmented remains to resolve into a coherent structure, revealing a whale unlike those that inhabit the oceans today. It represented a lineage that had taken the path of active predation to an extreme, combining size with anatomical features designed for direct interaction with large prey. In the quiet exposure of stone along that Peruvian coast, the discovery of Livyatan offered more than a single specimen. It provided a glimpse into a moment when the ocean supported forms of life that moved according to different rules, shaped by pressures that encouraged both growth and confrontation. The fossil record, though incomplete, carried enough detail to suggest the presence of an animal that occupied a distinct role within its environment, leaving behind a structure that continues to speak through its preserved form. Scale can be understood not only through measurement, but through the way a body occupies space, and in this case, the dimensions of Livyatan begin to settle into place with a quiet weight. Estimates suggest a length ranging from 13 to 17 meters, placing it within the same general range as modern sperm whales. Yet even within this familiar frame, the details of its construction shift the impression entirely, as if a known outline has been filled with a different intention. Its body would have carried mass distributed for strength rather than endurance in the deep. The proportions of the head alone altered the balance, extending forward with a density that implied purpose beyond navigation or sound production. Muscles along the neck and torso likely anchored this structure, supporting not only its weight, but the forces generated during active encounters. Movement through the water would have remained fluid, yet beneath that motion lay a capacity for sudden exertion where acceleration and control worked together within a single frame. In comparison to modern sperm whales, the difference becomes clearer through behavior rather than size alone. Today's sperm whales descend into great depths, their bodies adapted to withstand pressure as they pursue soft-bodied prey in darkness. Their feeding relies on suction, drawing prey inward with precision rather than overpowering it through direct force. Livyatan, by contrast, appears to have occupied a different layer of the ocean, one where light still filtered downward and where encounters unfolded in open space rather than confined depths. This distinction reshapes the meaning of its size. A body of 13 to 17 meters, when paired with the anatomical features already revealed in its skull and teeth, becomes something more than a large animal moving through water. It becomes a structure capable of interacting with other large organisms on equal terms. Its presence would not have been defined by avoidance or quiet pursuit, but by engagement, where movement led toward contact rather than away from it. The distribution of muscle along its body suggests a design that balanced, sustained swimming with the ability to generate force in short intervals. The tail, broad and powerful, would have provided propulsion not only for travel but for sudden directional changes, aligning the body during critical moments. Fins, though less emphasized, contributed to stability, ensuring that each movement translated efficiently through the water without unnecessary loss of energy. Together, these elements created a form that was both controlled and capable, maintaining composure even during rapid shifts in motion. Within this structure, the head remained the defining feature. Its size alone indicated a concentration of function, housing not only sensory systems, but also the mechanisms of capture. The jaws, supported by dense bone and strong musculature, extended forward as a focal point of interaction. When considering the full length of the animal, the head occupied a significant portion, reinforcing the idea that much of its behavior centered around direct engagement with its surroundings. Presence, in this context, extends beyond physical dimensions. It reflects how an organism influences the space it moves through, how its existence alters the patterns of other life around it. Livyatan, by virtue of its size and design, would have carried a presence that shaped the behavior of nearby species. Movement patterns, feeding strategies, and even migration routes may have adjusted in response, not through sudden change, but through gradual adaptation to a persistent influence. In the Miocene Ocean, where multiple large forms already moved through overlapping environments, Livyatan added a distinct layer to that complexity. Its size aligned it with other giants, yet its behavior set it apart, creating a contrast between form and function that defined its role. It was not simply another large whale within an abundant system, but a predator whose dimensions supported a different kind of interaction. Through this combination of scale, strength, and design, Livyatan occupied a space that bridged familiarity and divergence. Its length matched that of modern relatives, yet everything within that length pointed toward a different way of living. One where power was not reserved for endurance and depth, but expressed through direct presence in the open sea. There are moments in the fossil record where a single feature carries enough weight to redefine an entire organism, and in this case, that feature rests in the teeth. Removed from the surrounding bone, each tooth still holds a presence that suggests more than simple function, its size alone marking a departure from what is typically seen in marine mammals. Some extend beyond 30 centimeters in length, dense and solid from root to tip, their surfaces smooth yet resilient, shaped to endure repeated force without failure. Their construction reveals a balance between durability and purpose. Thick enamel encases each tooth, forming a protective layer that resists fracture under stress. Beneath it, the internal structure supports compression, allowing the tooth to absorb impact without splintering. This combination suggests not a delicate interaction with soft prey, but repeated engagement with bodies that resisted, twisted, and pushed back. The teeth were not tools of precision cutting, but instruments of control, capable of maintaining grip even as force moved in multiple directions. Unlike many modern whales, where teeth are reduced or limited in function, these remained active along both jaws. Upper and lower rows aligned in a way that created a complete enclosure when the mouth closed, surrounding whatever had been seized. Each tooth contributed to a collective structure, distributing pressure across multiple points, rather than concentrating it in a single location. This arrangement increased stability, ensuring that once contact was made, it could be sustained without immediate loss. The spacing between teeth further supports this interpretation. They were neither too close nor too far apart, positioned to interlock without interference, allowing for a firm hold on irregular shapes. When encountering large prey, this spacing would have enabled the jaws to adjust around the body, maintaining contact even as the prey moved. The teeth did not rely on slicing edges, but on their ability to resist displacement, holding through motion rather than ending it instantly. Wear patterns observed on these teeth offer additional insight. Subtle abrasions and marks suggest repeated contact with resistant surfaces, not only flesh but possibly bone. These traces accumulate over time, recording interactions that involved sustained pressure and movement. The enamel, though thick, bears these marks as a quiet record of use, each one reflecting a moment where force was applied and maintained. Their roots extend deeply into the jaw, anchoring each tooth with stability that matches its external strength. This depth ensures that the force exerted during biting is transferred efficiently into the surrounding bone, reducing the likelihood of loosening or breakage. The jaw itself, already reinforced, works in conjunction with this anchoring system, creating a unified structure capable of withstanding the stresses associated with large prey capture. In considering these teeth, it becomes clear that they were not isolated features, but part of an integrated system designed for a specific form of interaction. They operated in coordination with the muscles, the skull, and the overall body plan, each element supporting the others. The result is a mechanism that does not depend on speed alone, but on the ability to secure and maintain control over something that does not yield easily. Within the broader context of the Miocene Ocean, these teeth represent a shift in how predators could engage with their environment. They allowed access to a range of prey that required more than passive feeding or quick strikes. The presence of such structures suggests that certain whales had moved fully into a role where direct confrontation with large organisms was not only possible, but central to their survival. Through their size, structure, and placement, these teeth alter the interpretation of the animal that carried them. They indicate a form built not for filtering or suction, but for interaction at a scale that matched the largest bodies moving through the water. In their design, the boundary between predator and prey becomes more defined, shaped by the capacity to hold, to endure resistance, and to apply force with consistency across each encounter. Force, when held within living structure, leaves traces not only in action but in the architecture that supports it. In the case of Livyatan, the arrangement of bone across the skull and jaws carries a quiet indication of how much pressure could be generated and sustained. The regions surrounding the jaw joint appear thickened and reinforced, forming a foundation that distributes stress across a broad surface rather than allowing it to concentrate in a single point. This design suggests a system built to endure repeated strain, where each closure of the jaws involved not only strength, but stability over time. Muscle attachment areas along the skull further deepen this impression. Broad, textured surfaces provide space for powerful musculature, capable of contracting with significant force. When these muscles engaged, they would have drawn the jaws together with a controlled intensity, converting biological energy into mechanical pressure. The alignment of these structures indicates efficiency, where movement is directed forward with minimal loss, allowing the full capacity of the muscles to act upon whatever lay between the teeth. Within such a framework, bite force becomes more than a measure of strength. It becomes an interaction between structure and resistance, where the ability to maintain pressure matters as much as the initial closing of the jaws. In large marine mammals, generating force is only part of the process, as the environment itself introduces variables such as buoyancy and movement. Livyatan's anatomy suggests it could anchor itself through its own mass and muscular coordination, stabilizing its body while applying sustained force during encounters. This capability implies a form of combat that extends beyond a single moment. When engaging with large-bodied animals, resistance would not be brief or passive. Prey of significant size can twist, accelerate, and attempt to break free, introducing forces that act against the predator's grip. The reinforced skull and jaw structure of Livyatan indicate an ability to absorb these counterforces without compromising integrity. Bone, muscle, and connective tissue worked together to maintain alignment, ensuring that pressure remained consistent even as movement shifted around it. The positioning of the jaws also contributes to this function. Their forward extension allows for direct engagement, bringing the point of contact into alignment with the body's central axis. This reduces lateral stress and enhances control, enabling the predator to adjust its position without losing grip. Each movement becomes part of a coordinated sequence where force is applied, maintained, and adjusted in response to the behavior of the prey. In this context, the distinction between hunting and confrontation begins to blur. The anatomical features suggest not only the ability to capture, but to remain engaged through prolonged interaction. Rather than relying solely on speed or surprise, Livyatan appears capable of meeting resistance directly, maintaining contact until the outcome shifts in its favor. This approach requires both strength and endurance, as the exchange of force continues until one side yields. The surrounding body supports this process through its own design. A strong, flexible torso allows for adjustments in orientation, while the tail provides the propulsion needed to counter movement from the prey. Together, these elements create a system where force can be applied from multiple directions, each contributing to the overall control of the encounter. The animal does not rely on a single action, but on a sequence of coordinated movements that sustain pressure over time. Within the broader ecosystem, such capabilities would influence how other species interacted with this predator. Large-bodied animals, already carrying significant energy reserves, would represent valuable targets, yet also introduce greater risk during capture. The presence of a predator capable of managing these risks suggests an environment where confrontation formed a consistent part of survival, shaping behavior across multiple levels. In the structure of Livyatan's jaws and skull, this dynamic becomes visible. Each element reflects a capacity not only to generate force, but to endure it, to remain engaged within an interaction that does not resolve instantly. Through this balance of strength and stability, the animal occupies a role defined by direct engagement, where the boundary between predator and prey is shaped through sustained contact and controlled power. Patterns in ancient bone carry a quiet narrative, one that unfolds not through motion, but through the marks left behind after movement has long ceased. Within these traces, a picture begins to form of what Livyatan may have pursued, shaped not by speculation alone, but by repeated signs embedded in fossil remains. Across different regions, the bones of other whales show distinct alterations, surfaces interrupted by deep impressions and fractures that align with the dimensions and spacing of large conical teeth. These marks do not appear randomly, but in consistent arrangements that suggest deliberate contact during life rather than damage occurring after death. Among these remains, medium-sized baleen whales appear frequently, their bodies positioned within a range that would have made them both accessible and substantial as targets. Their size offered a balance between energy gained and effort required, presenting a form that could be engaged without the extreme difficulty posed by the largest individuals. The structure of their skeletons, while massive, still allowed for vulnerability in specific areas, particularly along the flanks and near the base of the fins, where bone and tissue could be more readily penetrated. The distribution of bite marks along these regions indicates an approach that focused on control rather than immediate destruction. Contact points suggest attempts to secure grip, to limit movement, and to maintain position during the interaction. This pattern aligns with the anatomical features already observed in Livyatan, where teeth and jaw structure emphasize holding and sustained pressure. Rather than relying on a single decisive action, the process appears to have involved continued engagement, where the predator adjusted its position in response to the prey's movements. Within these interactions, certain individuals may have been more frequently targeted. Juvenile whales, still developing in strength and coordination, would have presented a different set of challenges compared to fully grown adults. Their smaller size and relative inexperience could have made them more accessible, particularly when separated from larger groups. Similarly, individuals weakened by illness or injury may have moved differently through the water, their altered patterns detectable to a predator attuned to subtle changes in motion. The presence of healed injuries in some fossil specimens suggests that not all encounters resulted in immediate death. Bone that shows signs of recovery indicates that attacks could be survived, at least temporarily, leaving behind a record of repeated interaction between predator and prey. These traces contribute to an understanding of a dynamic environment where survival did not depend solely on avoidance, but also on endurance and recovery after contact had already occurred. Beyond active hunting, there is also evidence that suggests opportunistic behavior. In marine ecosystems, the boundary between hunting and scavenging is often fluid, shaped by availability rather than strict separation. Large carcasses, once present, provide concentrated resources that can be accessed by multiple species. The structure of Livyatan's teeth and jaws would have allowed it to take advantage of such opportunities, tearing into already deceased animals with the same efficiency used during active predation. This flexibility in feeding behavior reflects an adaptation to a variable environment, where success depended not only on the ability to capture prey, but also on recognizing and utilizing available resources. The ocean, even in periods of abundance, presents moments where direct pursuit may not yield immediate results, and the capacity to shift between strategies becomes an advantage. Through these combined lines of evidence, a clearer image emerges of Livyatan's role within its ecosystem. It interacted with other whales, not as distant neighbors, but as part of a direct and ongoing relationship shaped by movement, strength, and opportunity. Medium-sized baleen whales, juveniles, and vulnerable individuals formed a consistent part of this interaction, while occasional scavenging added another layer to its behavior. In the stillness of the fossil record, these interactions remain preserved as patterns rather than events. Each mark, each fracture, contributes to a broader understanding of how Livyatan moved through its environment, engaging with prey in ways that reflect both its physical design and the conditions of the ocean it inhabited. Across distant coastlines and buried seabeds, the record of ancient life carries interruptions that do not follow the quiet patterns of growth and decay. Within the preserved remains of whales, surfaces appear marked by force, their smooth contours broken by deep gouges and irregular fractures. These markings do not resemble the gradual wear of time, nor the clean divisions caused by geological pressure. Instead, they hold a distinct geometry, curved and spaced in ways that mirror the arrangement of large teeth pressed into bone during moments of direct contact. Some of these bones show parallel impressions aligned in sequences that suggest a closing jaw. The spacing between each mark remains consistent, reflecting the distance between teeth that once met around living tissue. In certain specimens, the depth of these impressions extends beyond the outer surface, penetrating into the internal structure of the bone. This level of force indicates not a brief encounter, but a sustained interaction where pressure was applied long enough to leave a permanent record. Fractures accompany these impressions in ways that further clarify their origin. Bones that have been subjected to impact from large predators often display splintering patterns that radiate outward from the point of contact. These fractures differ from those caused by post-burial processes, which tend to follow lines of weakness created by mineralization. Here, the breakage reflects a moment of stress applied from outside, a force that exceeded the natural resilience of the bone and caused it to give way. In some cases, these injuries show signs of healing. The edges of the fractures appear smoothed, with new bone forming around the damaged area. This indicates that the animal survived the initial encounter, continuing to live long enough for its body to begin the process of repair. Such evidence adds a layer of continuity to these interactions, suggesting that encounters between large predators and whales were not isolated events, but part of a broader pattern that unfolded repeatedly over time. These markings are not confined to a single location. Fossil sites across different regions reveal similar evidence, each one contributing to a wider understanding of how these interactions were distributed throughout the Miocene seas. From coastal deposits to deeper marine sediments, the same types of gouges and fractures appear, suggesting that the forces responsible were present across multiple environments. This consistency points toward a behavior that was not restricted to a specific area, but occurred wherever the conditions allowed. The repetition of these patterns across such distances reinforces the idea that large, toothed predators played a significant role within the ecosystem. The marks left behind are not random or rare, but form a recurring feature within the fossil record. Each instance adds to a cumulative picture where the frequency of these interactions becomes increasingly apparent. The ocean, in this period, supported a level of engagement between predator and prey that left visible traces in the very structure of the bones that remain. Closer examination of these marks reveals subtle variations that correspond to different types of encounters. Some impressions are shallow, suggesting contact without full penetration, while others are deep and pronounced, indicating a stronger application of force. The orientation of these marks can also vary, reflecting changes in position during the interaction. Together, these details provide insight into the dynamics of each encounter, offering glimpses of movement and resistance captured within the stillness of fossilized bone. Through these signs, the fossil record preserves more than static remains. It holds evidence of motion, of contact, and of the forces exchanged between large organisms within the ocean. Each gouge and fracture contributes to an understanding of how these animals interacted, revealing a system where such encounters were woven into the fabric of daily survival. In this accumulation of marked bone, a pattern emerges that extends beyond individual events. It reflects a consistent presence of large predators capable of engaging with whales at close range, leaving behind traces that endure long after the motion itself has faded. Distance itself becomes part of the environment when there is little to interrupt it, and in these open stretches of ocean, movement unfolds without the cover or boundaries that shape life nearer to shore. Within this space, Hunting follows a different logic, one that does not rely on concealment among structures, but on timing, alignment, and the ability to close gaps with intent. Livyatan appears suited to this setting, its body and sensory systems arranged for encounters that begin at range and resolve through direct approach. In open water, visibility extends farther, yet remains altered by light and depth, creating layers where form shifts and edges soften. Within this shifting clarity, detection becomes essential. The acoustic capabilities inherited from its lineage would have allowed Livyatan to perceive movement well beyond the limits of sight, mapping the position and motion of other large bodies through returning echoes. This awareness provided a foundation for action, enabling the predator to orient itself long before any physical contact occurred. Once a target was identified, the approach required both restraint and precision. Speed alone would not guarantee success, as large prey could alter direction or accelerate in response. Instead, movement likely followed a controlled acceleration where distance was reduced without unnecessary disturbance. The body, aligned through its length, would have maintained stability, allowing each adjustment to translate efficiently through the water. In this phase, the interaction remained largely unseen, defined by positioning rather than immediate force. As the distance narrowed, the dynamic shifted. Attacks may have originated from below or from the side, angles that align with the structure of both predator and prey. Approaching from beneath positions the predator along a path where upward motion can intersect with the body of the prey, while lateral approaches allow for alignment with flanks that may offer less resistance. These trajectories do not require concealment, but depend on the ability to reach the point of contact before the prey can fully respond. The final moments of an encounter would have unfolded quickly, shaped by the transition from motion to force. The jaws, already aligned through the approach, would close with precision, guided by both physical positioning and sensory input. Contact initiates a different phase, where speed gives way to control, and the interaction becomes one of sustained engagement. In open water, without physical boundaries, the predator must rely entirely on its own structure to maintain contact, adjusting continuously as the prey moves. Power plays a central role in this exchange, yet it is not expressed as a single action. Instead, it unfolds through coordinated movement, where the body supports the jaws and the tail provides the force needed to counter resistance. Each adjustment serves to maintain alignment, ensuring that pressure remains directed and effective. The absence of obstacles means that nothing external assists in restricting the prey, placing full reliance on the predator's ability to manage the interaction. These encounters, while brief in duration, carry a complexity shaped by both participants. Large prey possess their own capacity for movement and resistance, introducing variability into each interaction. Livyatan's design suggests an ability to respond to these changes, maintaining contact through shifting conditions. The sequence of approach, contact, and control becomes a continuous flow, guided by both strength and awareness. Within the broader ocean, this mode of hunting contributes to a system where interactions occur across open space, unconfined by terrain. The absence of ambush structures does not reduce the effectiveness of predation, but reshapes it, emphasizing different aspects of capability. Detection, alignment, and sustained force replace concealment as the primary elements of success. In this environment, Livyatan moves not as a hidden presence, but as one defined by its capacity to engage directly within a vast and uninterrupted expanse. Within the structure of a whale's skull, There are spaces that do not serve bone or muscle, but something less visible. Something that leaves no direct imprint in the fossil record, yet shapes every movement the body makes. In Livyatan, as in other members of its lineage, the brain would have occupied a significant portion of this internal space, its development reflecting a level of processing that extends beyond simple reaction. Though soft tissue does not preserve, the proportions of the skull suggest an organ capable of integrating complex sensory input with coordinated action. Such capacity implies a form of awareness that operates continuously, interpreting signals carried through water and adjusting behavior in response. The ocean transmits information through sound, pressure, and subtle changes in motion, and a predator attuned to these cues can construct a moving map of its surroundings. Livyatan, equipped with advanced acoustic perception, would have been able to follow these signals across distance, maintaining contact with prey that remained out of sight. This ability transforms hunting from a chance encounter into a guided process, where direction and timing are informed by ongoing interpretation. Movement, in this context, becomes deliberate rather than incidental. Tracking prey over long distances requires persistence and adjustment, where the predator modifies its path in response to shifting signals. Each change in direction reflects a decision, shaped by the information available at that moment. The process unfolds gradually, with the predator maintaining alignment over extended periods, conserving energy until the conditions for engagement become favorable. Within this framework, learned behavior may have played a role. Repeated interactions with similar prey would provide opportunities to refine approach patterns, improving efficiency over time. The body, while shaped by evolution, still responds to experience, adjusting its movements based on outcomes encountered before. Such learning does not require conscious planning in a human sense, but emerges through the reinforcement of successful actions, gradually shaping how the animal interacts with its environment. Coordination between different parts of the body also reflects this integration. The alignment of head, torso, and tail during pursuit suggests a level of internal synchronization where each movement supports the next without hesitation. Sensory input guides this coordination, allowing the predator to adjust its position in real time as conditions change. This continuous feedback loop between perception and motion creates a fluid sequence where the act of hunting unfolds as a series of connected adjustments rather than isolated actions. In encounters with large prey, this coordination becomes especially significant. The ability to anticipate movement, to adjust position before contact occurs, increases the likelihood of maintaining control once engagement begins. Rather than reacting after the fact, the predator moves in alignment with the expected behavior of its target, positioning itself where resistance can be managed most effectively. The presence of such capabilities suggests that hunting was not a matter of random movement through the ocean, but a process shaped by intention. Paths were followed, distances were closed, and actions were taken in sequences that reflect an underlying structure of behavior. The ocean, though vast and dynamic, becomes more navigable when interpreted through this lens, where patterns can be detected and used to guide movement. Across time, these patterns would have contributed to the broader role Livyatan played within its ecosystem. Its interactions with prey were not isolated events, but part of a consistent approach that influenced how and where it moved. Each encounter added to a framework of experience, reinforcing certain behaviors while diminishing others. In this way, the intelligence suggested by its anatomy becomes visible not through direct observation, but through the coherence of its actions. The combination of sensory perception, coordinated movement, and learned response forms a system where hunting emerges as an intentional process, shaped by both the structure of the body and the information carried through the water. Vibration moves through water with a reach that extends far beyond what light can sustain, carrying information across distances where visibility fades into gradients and shadow. Within this medium, sound becomes more than a signal. It becomes a method of perception that reshapes how space is understood. For a predator like Livyatan, this capacity would have formed a central part of its interaction with the ocean, allowing it to sense presence and movement long before direct contact occurred. Echolocation, developed within the lineage of toothed whales, operates through the emission of focused sound pulses that travel outward and return as echoes. These returning signals carry subtle variations that reflect the size, shape, and motion of objects within the water. The structure of Livyatan's skull suggests that it possessed the anatomical features necessary to generate and interpret such signals, integrating them into a continuous awareness of its surroundings. Within this system, each pulse extends perception outward, transforming open water into a space defined by reflected information. The advantage of sound lies in its ability to persist where light diminishes. As depth increases or conditions shift, visual cues become less reliable, blending into a uniform field where outlines soften and distance becomes difficult to judge. Sound, by contrast, maintains its structure, moving through the water with minimal loss, carrying detailed information across wide areas. This allows a predator to detect movement even when the target remains obscured, following patterns that are not visible but still present. Through repeated emission and reception of these pulses, Livyatan would have constructed a dynamic representation of its environment. Objects do not appear as static forms, but as evolving signals, shifting in response to their own movement and the movement of the predator. This continuous feedback enables adjustment in real time, guiding direction and speed with precision. Each echo contributes to a broader pattern, allowing the predator to maintain alignment with its target even as conditions change. In this way, sound functions not only as a sensory tool, but as an extension of action. The detection of prey through echolocation informs the approach, shaping how distance is closed and how position is adjusted. Rather than relying on sight to confirm proximity, the predator operates through a layered awareness where information arrives through sound and is translated directly into movement. The transition from detection to engagement becomes seamless, guided by a system that remains effective across varying conditions. The strength of this system lies in its consistency. While visual perception may fluctuate with depth, light, and water clarity, echolocation provides a stable framework that remains available regardless of these variables. This stability allows hunting to proceed without interruption, ensuring that the predator is not limited by changes in visibility. Movement through the water remains informed, directed by signals that persist even in environments where sight alone would offer little guidance. The interaction between sound and structure further enhances this capability. The tissues within the head, adapted to focus and transmit sound, work in coordination with the auditory system to refine incoming information. This coordination allows for differentiation between objects, distinguishing prey from background features through subtle variations in the returning echoes. The predator does not perceive a uniform field, but a layered space where each element carries its own acoustic signature. Within the broader dynamics of the ocean, this reliance on sound introduces a different dimension to predation. Encounters are not confined to moments of visual contact, but begin at a distance, shaped by signals that travel ahead of the predator's movement. The process unfolds gradually, guided by information that accumulates over time, leading toward an eventual point of contact that has already been mapped through sound. In this context, hunting becomes a convergence of perception and motion, where the medium itself carries the information needed to act. Livyatan moves through this acoustic landscape with a continuity that does not depend on light, guided by echoes that define the space around it and direct each step of its approach. Another presence moved through these waters, with a form shaped along a different lineage, yet guided by similar pressures toward size and capability. Within the same ocean, a giant shark emerged, its body streamlined and powerful, carrying a design refined through millions of years of predatory evolution. This was Megalodon, a creature whose existence intersected with that of Livyatan, not as a distant parallel, but as a contemporary force occupying overlapping space. Its structure followed a different logic, built around cartilage rather than bone, yet no less formidable in its function. The jaws extended wide, supported by muscles capable of closing with immense force, while rows of serrated teeth lined the mouth in layered succession. Each tooth was shaped for cutting, its edges finely ridged to slice through dense material with efficiency. Unlike the conical teeth of Livyatan, which held and controlled, these teeth acted to remove sections of tissue, creating immediate disruption upon contact. Size placed Megalodon within a similar range to the largest marine mammals of its time, allowing it to engage with prey that matched the scale of its own body. Its presence within the ocean would have been defined by movement through both coastal and open regions, where food sources concentrated and interactions between large species occurred more frequently. This distribution brought it into environments where Livyatan also moved, creating a shared landscape shaped by overlapping needs. Both predators targeted large prey, including whales that had grown abundant within the Miocene seas. This convergence in diet positioned them within the same ecological space, where the availability of food influenced behavior and movement. Each predator, though different in anatomy, responded to the same underlying conditions, seeking out sources of energy that justified the demands of their size. In this shared pursuit, their paths would have crossed, not as isolated occurrences, but as part of a broader pattern within the ecosystem. The differences in their methods introduce a contrast that defines their interaction. Megalodon, with its slicing dentition, likely relied on swift, powerful bites that removed large portions of flesh, weakening prey through repeated strikes. Its approach emphasized disruption, using momentum and cutting force to reduce resistance over time. Livyatan, by contrast, appears adapted for sustained engagement, applying pressure through its grip and maintaining contact as it controlled movement. These strategies do not oppose one another directly, but exist as variations on a common goal. Within this context, competition becomes an inherent part of their coexistence. When two large predators rely on similar resources within the same environment, their interactions extend beyond direct encounters. The presence of one influences the behavior of the other, shaping movement patterns, feeding times, and territorial use. Even without direct conflict, the overlap in their ecological roles creates a form of indirect competition, where each must operate within the constraints imposed by the other. There remains the possibility of direct interaction as well. In an environment where both species pursue large prey, encounters between them would not be unexpected. The outcome of such interactions would depend on multiple factors, including size, condition, and circumstance. Neither predator exists in isolation from risk, and the potential for injury introduces a level of caution within these encounters, even for animals of such scale. Across the Miocene Ocean, the coexistence of Livyatan and Megalodon reflects a period where multiple apex predators shared the same waters, each shaped by similar pressures, yet expressing different adaptations. Their presence adds depth to the structure of the ecosystem, illustrating how size and capability can evolve along separate paths while still converging within the same space. In this shared environment, the balance between them does not settle into a fixed arrangement, but remains fluid, shaped by movement, availability of prey, and the continuous adjustments of each predator. Geography leaves its own quiet imprint on the fossil record, not through motion, but through the repetition of presence in particular places. When remains of different species appear within the same layers of sediment, separated only by subtle shifts in time, a pattern begins to form that suggests more than coincidence. Along ancient coastlines and within deposits that once lay beneath open water, traces of both Livyatan and Megalodon emerge in proximity, their histories intersecting within the same regions. These locations reflect environments where life concentrated, areas shaped by currents that carried nutrients and supported dense populations of marine organisms. Shallow coastal shelves provided zones where productivity remained high, drawing in large animals that depended on consistent access to food. Beyond these shelves, the open ocean extended into deeper water, yet remained connected through the movement of prey species that traveled between these spaces. Within this network, boundaries were not fixed, and movement between regions occurred as part of a broader pattern of migration and feeding. The presence of both predators within these overlapping environments suggests that their ranges were not isolated from one another. Fossil evidence indicates that each occupied both coastal and offshore areas, following the distribution of prey rather than remaining confined to a single habitat. This overlap brought them into the same hunting grounds, where the availability of large whales and other marine mammals created opportunities that neither could ignore. In such shared spaces, the dynamics of movement become more complex. Each predator navigates not only the distribution of prey, but also the presence of another large hunter operating within the same area. The ocean, though vast, does not offer infinite separation when resources concentrate within specific regions. Instead, it becomes a landscape defined by intersecting paths where the trajectories of different species cross repeatedly over time. These intersections increase the likelihood of interaction, though not every encounter results in direct conflict. Often, the presence of another predator may influence behavior at a distance, shaping how each moves through the environment. Adjustments in timing, direction, and depth may occur as a response to shared use of space, creating a pattern where coexistence involves continuous adaptation rather than static separation. Yet the potential for direct encounters remains embedded within this system. When two predators pursue similar prey within the same area, moments arise where their activities converge. A feeding event, a migration route, or a concentration of prey can bring them into closer proximity, where the distance between them narrows beyond avoidance. In these moments, the structure of the environment offers little to mediate interaction, as open water provides few barriers or refuges. The ocean, in this context, takes on a different character. It is no longer defined solely by abundance, but by the distribution of that abundance across shared spaces. Areas that support high productivity become focal points where multiple large organisms gather, each drawn by the same underlying conditions. Within these zones, the presence of more than one apex predator introduces a layer of complexity that shapes how each operates. This overlapping use of territory does not settle into a fixed pattern, but remains fluid, influenced by changes in prey availability, seasonal shifts, and the movements of each species. The boundaries between their ranges shift gradually, expanding or contracting in response to these factors. Over time, this creates a dynamic system where space is continuously negotiated rather than clearly divided. Through the evidence preserved in sediment, a picture emerges of an ocean where the paths of Livyatan and Megalodon frequently crossed. Their coexistence within the same regions reflects a balance that is not stable, but constantly adjusting, shaped by the interplay of movement, resource distribution, and the presence of other large predators. Encounters between large predators do not announce themselves in the record as clearly as bone or tooth, yet their possibility is written into the way these animals occupied the same waters. When two species of comparable scale depend on similar prey, their movements inevitably intersect, not always in direct conflict, but within a shared awareness shaped by proximity. In such moments, the interaction extends beyond the pursuit of prey and enters a space where each becomes aware of the other as a presence capable of influence. Livyatan and Megalodon, each built for power in different ways, would have carried this awareness through the environments they shared. Their encounters may have begun at a distance, detected through movement, vibration, or sound before any visual confirmation occurred. In open water, the approach of another large body alters the surrounding patterns, creating disturbances that travel outward. Both predators, attuned to such signals, would have recognized these changes, adjusting their own movement in response. When distance closed further, the contrast between their forms became more pronounced. Megalodon, streamlined and shaped for rapid acceleration, relied on bursts of speed that allowed it to deliver powerful, slicing bites. Its approach likely involved swift entry into contact, using momentum to drive its teeth through dense tissue, then withdrawing to repeat the action. This method focuses on reducing the prey's ability to resist through successive strikes, each one removing a portion of strength. Livyatan, by contrast, appears structured for sustained engagement. Its jaws, aligned for gripping, would have closed with force intended to hold rather than immediately release. Once contact was established, the interaction would shift toward maintaining control, using the strength of its jaws and the stability of its body to manage movement. Instead of repeated separation, its approach suggests continuity, where pressure is applied and adjusted as the situation evolves. In a direct encounter between the two, these differing strategies create a complex interaction. Megalodon's slicing bites introduce immediate damage, targeting areas where tissue can be removed efficiently. Livyatan's grip, if successfully established, limits movement and brings the exchange into a more controlled space. Each method carries its own advantages, and the outcome would depend on the sequence of actions, the positioning of each animal, and the condition in which they met. Both predators possess the capacity to injure the other. The teeth of Megalodon, designed for cutting, could inflict significant damage with a single well-placed strike. Livyatan's jaws, capable of applying sustained force, could restrain or destabilize if they secured a hold. The balance between these capabilities introduces uncertainty into any encounter, where neither holds a consistent advantage across all situations. Movement within the water further influences these interactions. Megalodon's reliance on speed allows it to initiate contact quickly, but requires space to maneuver and repeat its strikes. Livyatan's approach depends on maintaining alignment once contact occurs, using its body to resist displacement. The open ocean provides room for both strategies, yet offers no fixed points that either can use to anchor themselves, placing emphasis on control within motion. These encounters, though likely infrequent, would have carried a weight that extended beyond the individuals involved. The presence of another predator, capable of direct interaction, introduces a factor that shapes behavior over time. Awareness of potential conflict may influence how each approaches prey, how it moves through shared areas, and how it responds to signals within the environment. Within this dynamic, the ocean becomes a space where multiple forms of power coexist, each expressed through different structures and methods. Livyatan and Megalodon, though distinct in their design, represent parallel outcomes of similar pressures, each capable of engaging not only with prey, but with one another under the right conditions. The record does not preserve the full detail of such encounters, yet the possibility remains embedded in the overlap of their existence, a quiet suggestion of moments where two different expressions of predation met within the same vast expanse. Movement across the ocean does not occur in isolation, and when pressure builds within an ecosystem, it begins to shape the paths taken by every living form within it. In the Miocene seas, the presence of multiple large predators introduced a persistent influence that extended far beyond individual encounters. Prey species moved within a landscape where threat was not confined to a single moment, but remained embedded within the structure of their environment, guiding behavior through continuous adjustment. Large whales, already adapted for long-distance travel, began to move in patterns that reflected more than the search for food. Their routes likely followed corridors where risk could be managed, balancing the need for nourishment with the necessity of avoiding concentrated predator activity. These movements did not eliminate danger, but redistributed it, shifting encounters across different regions and times. The ocean, though vast, offered limited refuge when predators operated across overlapping territories, creating a network of spaces where awareness became essential. Within these migrating groups, numbers played a role in shaping survival. Larger aggregations of individuals may have reduced the likelihood of any single whale becoming the focus of an attack, distributing risk across the group. Movement in such formations required coordination, where individuals maintained proximity and adjusted speed to remain within the collective. This behavior introduced a form of shared awareness, where the actions of one influenced the movement of many, creating a dynamic pattern that responded to external signals. Speed also became a factor in this balance. While size offered endurance and stability, the ability to accelerate or change direction could influence the outcome of an encounter. Prey species that could adjust their movement quickly, even within the constraints of their large bodies, gained an advantage in moments where distance needed to be increased or alignment needed to be altered. These adjustments, though subtle, contributed to a broader pattern where survival depended on a combination of physical capability and responsive behavior. The presence of predators like Livyatan and Megalodon introduced variability into the timing of these movements. Feeding grounds that once supported consistent patterns of activity may have become less predictable as prey species altered their arrival and departure in response to perceived risk. This variability influenced not only the movement of whales, but also the distribution of smaller organisms that formed the base of the food web, as changes at one level propagated through the system. In this environment, awareness extended beyond immediate perception. Signals carried through water, whether from movement, sound, or subtle changes in current, provided information that could be interpreted over distance. Prey species attuned to these signals could adjust their behavior before direct contact occurred, altering course or depth in response to cues that indicated the presence of a predator. This capacity for early detection became part of the ongoing interaction between predator and prey, shaping encounters before they fully formed. The cumulative effect of these adjustments created an ecosystem that remained in a state of continuous response. Each movement influenced another, forming a network of interactions that shifted with time and condition. Stability did not emerge from the absence of pressure, but from the ability of the system to absorb and adapt to it. The ocean, in this period, held a balance that was maintained through constant change, where tension existed not as disruption, but as a defining characteristic. Within this framework, the behavior of both predators and prey contributed to a shared dynamic. Predators adjusted their strategies in response to the movements of their targets, while prey adapted to the presence of those that pursued them. This interplay created a system where actions were rarely isolated, each one influencing the next in a sequence that extended across the entire ecosystem. Through this continuous interaction, the Miocene Ocean took on a character defined by responsiveness, where every movement carried the imprint of the pressures that shaped it. Depth, often imagined as a refuge, did not hold the same meaning within this shifting ocean, where the vertical space itself became part of the interaction between predator and prey. The water column, extending from the surface down through the dim layers below, formed a continuous field rather than a series of isolated zones. Within this field, movement between depths offered variation, but not complete separation from the influences that shaped survival. Livyatan appears to have operated primarily within the upper and mid-water regions, where light still filtered through and where large prey frequently moved. These layers supported a convergence of activity, with whales traveling, feeding, and navigating through spaces that remained connected both horizontally and vertically. The predator's presence within these zones positioned it along pathways that prey species could not entirely avoid, as their own movements were guided by resources distributed across the same depths. For many marine animals, descending into deeper water can serve as a temporary means of avoiding surface-level threats. Changes in pressure, temperature, and light create conditions that alter how organisms move and perceive their surroundings. Yet, this strategy depends on the nature of the predator being avoided. In this case, the structure and behavior of Livyatan suggest a capacity to follow prey across a range of depths within its operational zone, reducing the effectiveness of simple vertical escape. The ability to detect movement through sound further extends this reach. As prey shift downward, their presence remains traceable through the signals they generate, allowing the predator to maintain awareness even when direct visibility decreases. This continuity of perception limits the advantage gained by moving deeper, as the boundary between layers does not fully disrupt the flow of information that guides the hunt. Within the mid-water regions, light becomes more diffuse, creating an environment where outlines soften and contrast diminishes. These conditions can obscure visual detection, yet they do not eliminate interaction. Movement still generates disturbances, and sound continues to travel through these layers, carrying information that can be interpreted by those adapted to receive it. In such an environment, the distinction between concealment and exposure becomes less defined, shaped more by behavior than by depth alone. For prey species, this creates a situation where safety cannot be anchored to a single direction. Moving upward brings proximity to the surface, where other factors influence survival, while moving downward does not guarantee separation from threat. Instead, survival depends on continuous adjustment, where position is altered in response to changing conditions rather than fixed as a permanent solution. This dynamic influences how movement is distributed across the water column. Rather than remaining within a single depth, prey may shift vertically as part of their regular patterns, balancing the need for food with the need to manage risk. These shifts create a layered system of activity where different depths hold varying concentrations of life at different times, yet remain interconnected through movement. Within this structure, Livyatans' presence extends across multiple layers, not by occupying them all simultaneously, but by operating within a range that intersects with the paths of its prey. Its ability to move efficiently through these depths, combined with its sensory capabilities, allows it to engage with targets regardless of their vertical position within this range. The water column becomes a space of continuity rather than separation, where interactions can occur at various levels without being confined to a single plane. As a result, the ocean takes on a character where vulnerability is not tied to a specific location, but distributed throughout the environment. Each layer holds its own conditions, yet none provide complete isolation from the influences that shape survival. Movement through depth becomes part of an ongoing process where adaptation replaces fixed refuge and the balance between predator and prey extends across the full vertical reach of the sea. Mass alters the terms of every encounter, not by changing intent, but by reshaping what is possible when bodies meet within the same space. In the Miocene seas, size became more than a measure of scale. It functioned as both defense and opportunity, guiding how organisms interacted across the entire system. As whales grew larger, their bodies accumulated energy in concentrated form, creating living reserves that could sustain predators if successfully captured. At the same time, that same mass made them more difficult to subdue, introducing resistance that smaller prey could not offer. For predators, this balance presented a challenge that shaped their own development. Accessing such substantial resources required adaptations that extended beyond speed or agility alone. Strength became essential, as did the ability to maintain contact during prolonged interactions. Structures capable of generating and sustaining force were favored, allowing predators to engage with prey that could not be overcome through a single action. Over time, these pressures influenced the size and capability of the predators themselves, encouraging growth that matched the demands of their targets. This relationship did not move in a single direction. As predators adapted to handle larger prey, the prey species responded through their own changes. Increasing body size offered advantages, making it more difficult for predators to secure and control them. Larger individuals could withstand greater force, and their sheer mass introduced challenges in maneuverability for those attempting to engage them. In this way, size functioned as a form of protection, not absolute, but significant enough to influence survival. Yet growth alone did not define the response of prey species. Movement patterns also shifted, reflecting the need to manage encounters within an environment shaped by large predators. Some species may have adjusted their speed, while others altered how they traveled in relation to one another, forming groups that distributed risk. These changes, though varied, share a common origin in the pressures exerted by predators capable of interacting with large bodies. Within this system, evolution operates as a continuous exchange. Each adaptation in one group introduces new conditions for the other, creating a cycle where change remains ongoing. Predators refine their ability to capture, while prey refine their ability to avoid or withstand capture. This interplay does not settle into a fixed state, but remains dynamic, shaped by countless interactions that accumulate over time. The role of size within this exchange carries both advantage and limitation. Larger animals require more energy to sustain themselves, increasing the importance of consistent access to resources. For predators, this means that failure to secure sufficient prey carries greater consequences, as their own survival depends on maintaining a balance between energy intake and expenditure. For prey, increased size may reduce vulnerability in certain contexts, yet also demands greater intake of food, linking their survival to the same environmental conditions that support their predators. Across the ocean, this dynamic influences not only individual species, but the structure of the ecosystem as a whole. Energy moves through different levels in ways that reflect the sizes of the organisms involved, creating pathways that connect small producers to large consumers. As bodies grow, these pathways shift, redistributing energy and altering the interactions that define the system. Within this broader pattern, the presence of animals like Livyatan and Megalodon reflects a stage where size had become central to survival on both sides of the interaction. Their existence indicates that the ocean supported forms of life capable of reaching such scale, while also sustaining the conditions that drove them to evolve in response to one another. Through this continuous pressure, size becomes both a consequence and a driver of evolution, shaping how organisms live, move, and interact within the shared space of the sea. Energy moves through living systems as a quiet current, and in the bodies of the largest predators, that current must remain constant to sustain what they are. For an animal the size of Livyatan, each movement carries a cost, each contraction of muscle drawing from reserves that cannot remain idle for long. The scale that defines its strength also defines its need, creating a balance where intake must match expenditure with careful precision. Within this balance, feeding becomes a central rhythm rather than an occasional act. Large predators do not rely on a single successful encounter to sustain them for extended periods, but instead require repeated access to substantial prey. The energy stored within their bodies is significant, yet it is also continuously used, supporting not only movement but internal processes that maintain stability and function. Over time, this creates a pattern where hunting must occur regularly, each success contributing to the continuation of the next. The ocean provides these resources unevenly, shaped by currents, seasons, and the movements of prey. Even within a system of abundance, there are moments where availability shifts, and the predator must adjust to changing conditions. Livyatan, moving through this environment, would have needed to locate and engage prey often enough to sustain its size, aligning its movements with areas where energy remained concentrated. This alignment requires both awareness and efficiency, as unnecessary expenditure reduces the margin available for survival. Each hunt carries an investment of energy before any return is gained. Tracking prey over distance, adjusting position, and initiating contact all draw from the predator's reserves. If the encounter results in a successful capture, the energy gained offsets these costs, restoring balance. If it does not, the expenditure remains, creating a deficit that must be recovered through subsequent attempts. Over time, these outcomes accumulate, shaping the predator's overall condition. Failure to secure prey does not produce immediate collapse, but introduces a gradual shift. Energy reserves begin to diminish, reducing the capacity for sustained movement and effective engagement. Muscles that once generated force with ease begin to lose efficiency, and recovery between efforts becomes slower. This process unfolds over time, yet it remains present within every unsuccessful encounter, influencing the next attempt. The pressure to remain effective, therefore, is continuous. It does not arise only during moments of scarcity, but persists even within abundance, as the predator must maintain a balance between intake and use. This pressure shapes behavior, encouraging efficiency in movement, precision in approach, and consistency in execution. Each element of the hunt becomes part of a system designed to minimize loss and maximize return. Within this framework, Livyatan's anatomical features align with its energetic needs. The strength of its jaws, the coordination of its body, and the integration of its sensory systems all contribute to reducing the uncertainty of each encounter. By increasing the likelihood of success, these adaptations help maintain the balance required for survival, ensuring that the energy invested in hunting is more often returned. At the same time, this balance is never fixed. Conditions within the ocean shift, prey populations fluctuate, and competition introduces additional variables that influence access to resources. The predator must respond to these changes, adjusting its movement and behavior to maintain alignment with the flow of energy within the ecosystem. Through this continuous exchange, hunger becomes not simply a sensation, but a guiding force that shapes how the predator moves through its environment. It connects internal need with external action, linking the structure of the body to the conditions of the ocean. In this way, energy and hunger form a cycle that remains unbroken, driving movement, shaping behavior, and sustaining the presence of large predators within a system where balance must be maintained through constant engagement. Time does not erase every mark left upon a body, and in some cases, it preserves them with a clarity that outlasts the life they once belonged to. Within fossilized whale remains, certain surfaces carry signs of interruption, places where the smooth continuity of bone has been altered and then restored. These areas, shaped by both damage and healing, offer a record of encounters that did not end in finality, but continued beyond the moment of impact. Along the ribs and vertebrae of these ancient whales, impressions appear that correspond to the spacing and curvature of large teeth. In some specimens, these marks do not remain as open wounds, but show evidence of repair, where new bone has formed around the damaged region. The texture of these healed areas differs from the surrounding surface, often appearing thicker or slightly irregular, reflecting the body's response to injury. This process of healing indicates that the animal survived long enough for recovery to begin, carrying the trace of that encounter forward through its life. Such evidence suggests that interactions between large predators and whales were not singular events, but part of a broader pattern that repeated across time. The presence of multiple healed injuries within a single individual points toward more than one encounter, each leaving its own mark before the next occurred. This accumulation transforms the body into a record of experience, where survival is measured not by the absence of danger, but by the ability to endure and recover from it. The locations of these injuries provide further insight into how these encounters unfolded. Marks along the sides of the body or near the base of the fins suggest areas where predators may have attempted to secure a hold or disrupt movement. These regions, while protected by muscle and bone, remain points of vulnerability where force can be applied effectively. The consistency of these patterns across different specimens indicates that certain strategies were repeatedly employed during these interactions. Healing itself carries its own implications. The formation of new bone requires time and energy, resources that must be diverted from other processes within the body. During this period, the injured individual would have continued to move, feed, and navigate its environment, all while recovering from the damage it sustained. This suggests a resilience within these animals, an ability to maintain function even as they carried the effects of previous encounters. Across different fossil sites, similar patterns emerge, reinforcing the idea that these interactions were not isolated to a single region or species. The repetition of healed injuries in multiple individuals points toward an environment where risk was a consistent presence, influencing how these animals lived and moved. Each healed wound represents not only survival, but also the continuation of a cycle where encounters could occur again. Within this context, life in the Miocene Ocean appears shaped by a constant negotiation between vulnerability and endurance. The presence of large predators introduced a level of uncertainty that extended beyond any single moment, embedding itself within the daily existence of prey species. Movement, feeding, and migration all occurred within this framework, where the potential for interaction remained ever present. The scars preserved in these fossils do not convey the full detail of each encounter, yet they offer a glimpse into the persistence required to survive within such a system. Each mark reflects a moment where force was applied, where resistance met pressure, and where the outcome allowed for continuation rather than conclusion. Through these traces, the fossil record reveals an ocean where survival was not defined by avoidance alone, but by the capacity to endure repeated challenges. The bodies of these whales, marked and healed, carry forward a quiet testimony of a world where each encounter carried weight and where life continued through the balance between damage and recovery. A gradual alteration begins not with a single moment, but with a series of small adjustments that ripple outward across the ocean. During the later part of the Miocene, the conditions that once supported vast, stable patterns of life begin to shift, guided by changes in climate that reshape temperature, circulation, and the distribution of energy. These changes do not announce themselves abruptly, yet their effects accumulate, influencing how the ocean functions at every level. Water that once moved along familiar paths begins to follow new routes, altering the transport of heat between regions. Some areas grow cooler, others warmer, and the balance that once defined the environment starts to reorganize. These shifts affect the formation of currents that carry nutrients through the ocean, redistributing the resources upon which many forms of life depend. As these pathways change, the locations where energy gathers also begin to move, creating new centers of abundance while others diminish. At the surface, this transformation influences the growth of microscopic life that forms the foundation of marine food webs. Variations in temperature and nutrient availability affect the productivity of these organisms, which in turn shapes the distribution of species that rely on them. As these foundational layers adjust, the effects extend upward, reaching the larger animals whose survival depends on the continuity of these systems. Whales that once thrived in regions of consistent abundance encounter environments that no longer provide the same level of support. Some populations begin to shift their ranges, following the movement of food sources as they respond to the changing conditions. Others may face reduced availability, forcing adjustments in behavior that reflect the need to locate sufficient resources. These responses introduce new patterns of movement across the ocean, altering how species interact with one another. For large predators, these changes introduce additional complexity. The prey they depend on may become less predictable in both location and number, requiring greater effort to locate and engage. The balance between energy gained and energy spent begins to shift, narrowing the margin that sustains their survival. In an environment where conditions are no longer stable, maintaining this balance becomes increasingly difficult. At the same time, the structure of the ecosystem itself begins to reorganize. Species that can adapt to the new conditions may expand their presence, while others decline or shift to different regions. This reconfiguration alters the relationships between organisms, creating new interactions while reducing others that once played a central role. The ocean, once defined by a particular arrangement of life, begins to take on a different form. These changes do not unfold in isolation, but interact with one another in ways that amplify their effects. A shift in temperature influences currents, which in turn affects nutrient distribution, which then shapes the availability of food for higher levels of the ecosystem. Each element connects to the next, forming a network of change that extends across the entire ocean. Within this evolving environment, large predators face conditions that differ from those that shaped their development. The strategies that once supported their success may no longer align as closely with the new distribution of resources. Hunting becomes more dependent on locating increasingly variable prey, and the consistency that once defined their environment begins to fade. This period marks the beginning of a transition rather than an immediate transformation. The ocean does not lose its complexity, but reorganizes into a new configuration guided by the changing climate. For the largest predators, this shift introduces challenges that reflect the broader changes occurring throughout the system. As currents continue to adjust and ecosystems realign, the foundations that once supported these giants begin to move beneath them, creating a world where survival requires adaptation to conditions that are no longer constant. Absence reveals itself, not through what is present, but through what no longer arrives. In the shifting ocean of the late Miocene, certain movements begin to thin, migrations that once traced steady paths becoming less frequent, less dense, until the continuity they once carried begins to fragment. These changes are not marked by sudden emptiness, but by gradual reduction, a quiet lessening that alters the rhythm of life across wide distances. Among the most affected are the whale populations that once formed a significant portion of the ocean's living mass. Variations in climate, shifting currents, and changing patterns of productivity begin to influence their distribution and survival. Some groups diminish in number, while others alter their routes, moving in response to conditions that no longer support their previous ranges. These adjustments reshape where and when whales can be found, transforming the structure of the environment in which predators operate. For large hunters, whose existence depends on access to substantial prey, this change introduces a new condition. The presence of whales had once provided a reliable source of energy, concentrated within bodies large enough to sustain predators over extended periods. As these populations decline or disperse, that reliability begins to fade. Encounters become less predictable, requiring greater effort to locate the same resources that were once more readily available. This reduction in prey does not affect all predators equally. Those with broader diets may adjust, turning toward alternative sources of food as conditions change. Yet for specialists, whose anatomy and behavior have evolved to target specific types of prey, the impact is more pronounced. Their adaptations, once advantageous within a stable system, now limit their flexibility, tying their survival to resources that are becoming less accessible. Within this context, Livyatan occupies a position shaped by its specialization. Its structure, designed for engaging large-bodied prey, reflects a dependence on the presence of such animals within its environment. As the availability of these prey decreases, the alignment between its capabilities and the conditions of the ocean begins to shift. The strategies that once supported its success become less effective when the targets they depend on are no longer present in sufficient numbers. The consequences of this shift extend beyond individual encounters. Reduced access to prey influences the overall condition of predators, affecting their ability to maintain the energy balance required for survival. Hunting efforts may increase in frequency or range, yet with diminishing returns, as each attempt yields less consistent results. Over time, this imbalance can influence reproduction, growth, and longevity, gradually altering the presence of these predators within the ecosystem. At the same time, the decline in whale populations contributes to a broader reorganization of the ocean's structure. As large consumers diminish, the pathways through which energy moves are altered, affecting the distribution of resources across different levels of the system. This change influences not only predators, but also the many species connected through shared relationships, creating a cascade of adjustments that extend throughout the environment. Within this evolving landscape, balance becomes something that is no longer defined by stability, but by transition. The relationships that once shaped the ocean begin to loosen, replaced by new configurations that reflect the changing conditions. Predators and prey alike move within this shifting framework, their interactions guided by patterns that are still in the process of forming. The loss of prey does not represent a single event, but a gradual transformation that unfolds over time. It alters the conditions under which survival is possible, reshaping the connections between organisms and the resources they depend on. For large predators, this transformation introduces a level of uncertainty that was less present before, requiring adaptation to a world where the foundations of their existence are no longer constant. Through this quiet reduction, the ocean begins to move away from the state that once supported its largest hunters, setting the stage for further changes that continue to reshape the life within it. Pressure gathers in ways that are not always visible, yet its effects become evident in how movement changes across the ocean. As resources diminish and patterns of abundance shift, the distances between predators begin to close, bringing them into closer proximity than before. What was once a wide, loosely spaced system starts to tighten, concentrating activity into smaller regions where prey remains available. Within these regions, encounters between large predators become more frequent. Each individual moves with the same objective, guided by the need to locate and secure energy, and the overlap of these movements creates a shared space where competition unfolds directly. This interaction does not always take the form of immediate confrontation, yet the presence of another predator influences decisions, shaping how each one approaches the search for prey. The reduction in available resources introduces a condition where opportunities are no longer abundant enough to support wide separation. Predators that once operated across expansive territories now find themselves drawn toward the same areas, following the shifting distribution of prey. This convergence increases the likelihood of interference, where one predator's activity affects the success of another, altering the outcome of hunts that might otherwise have remained independent. In such an environment, efficiency becomes increasingly important. The margin between energy gained and energy spent narrows, and the ability to secure prey with minimal loss grows more significant. Movements may become more deliberate, with each action shaped by the awareness that unnecessary expenditure carries greater consequences. The presence of competitors adds another layer to this dynamic, as each predator must account not only for the behavior of prey, but also for the actions of others pursuing the same objective. The interactions that arise within this context vary in form. Some encounters may result in avoidance, where one predator alters its course to reduce direct overlap. Others may lead to moments of proximity, where both remain within the same space, their movements influenced by the presence of the other. In certain cases, the pursuit of the same prey may bring predators into direct competition, where the outcome depends on timing, position, and capability. As these interactions accumulate, they contribute to a broader pattern that shapes the structure of the ecosystem. Increased competition places additional strain on predators, influencing their condition over time. The need to expend more energy to secure the same resources affects growth, reproduction, and survival, gradually altering the composition of the population. Individuals that cannot maintain the balance between intake and expenditure may decline, reducing the number of large predators within the system. At the same time, the reduction in predator numbers feeds back into the environment, influencing the relationships between species. With fewer individuals present, the intensity of competition may ease in certain areas, while in others, the concentration of activity remains high. This uneven distribution reflects the ongoing adjustments taking place within the ocean, as it responds to the changing availability of resources. The thinning of the ecosystem does not occur uniformly, but emerges through these localized shifts, where some regions retain higher levels of activity, while others become less populated. Over time, these differences contribute to a new configuration, one that reflects the balance achieved under altered conditions. The ocean remains active, yet the density of its largest inhabitants begins to change, marking a transition in how energy moves through the system. Within this evolving landscape, even the strongest predators face challenges that extend beyond their physical capabilities. Strength alone cannot offset the effects of reduced resources and increased competition, and survival becomes tied to the ability to navigate a system that is no longer as accommodating as it once was. Through this gradual tightening of space and opportunity, the ocean moves toward a state where fewer large predators can be sustained, shaping the course of life within it as conditions continue to shift. Records within stone rarely announce an ending, yet they reveal it through absence. Layers that once carried traces of a presence begin to shift, and the forms that appeared consistently across time no longer return in the same way. In the case of Livyatan, its remains are found within a particular span of the Miocene, then gradually cease to appear, leaving behind a boundary that marks where its presence in the ocean came to an end. This disappearance does not point to a single cause, but to a convergence of changes that unfolded across the environment it inhabited. As climate patterns continued to shift, the structure of the ocean altered in ways that influenced temperature, circulation, and the distribution of life. These changes reshaped the conditions that had once supported large predators, introducing variability where stability had previously existed. Alongside these environmental adjustments, the decline and redistribution of prey played a significant role. Livyatan's existence depended on access to large-bodied animals, and as those populations diminished or moved into different regions, the connection between predator and prey weakened. Encounters that once occurred with greater frequency became less certain, requiring increased effort to locate the resources necessary for survival. Competition further influenced this process. As resources became more limited, interactions between large predators intensified, placing additional strain on individuals already adapting to changing conditions. The combined effect of reduced prey and increased competition narrowed the margin within which survival could be maintained, gradually influencing the number of individuals able to persist. These factors did not act independently, but intersected in ways that compounded their impact. A shift in climate affected prey availability, which in turn influenced predator behavior, which then interacted with the presence of competitors. Each element contributed to a broader pattern that altered the balance of the ecosystem, creating conditions that differed from those under which Livyatan had evolved. Within this shifting framework, the specialized nature of Livyatan's adaptations became increasingly significant. Its anatomy and behavior, once aligned with a system rich in large prey, offered less flexibility when those conditions changed. The very traits that defined its success limited its ability to adjust to new circumstances, linking its survival closely to a set of environmental conditions that were no longer stable. The fossil record captures this transition through the gradual reduction of evidence. Specimens become less frequent, their distribution narrowing until they are no longer found in layers that follow. This pattern suggests a decline that unfolded over time, rather than a sudden disappearance, reflecting the cumulative effects of the changes occurring within the ocean. As Livyatan fades from the record, the ecosystem continues to reorganize, shaped by the same forces that contributed to its decline. Other species adapt or shift, filling roles within the evolving structure, while the space, once occupied by this predator, becomes part of a new arrangement. The ocean remains active, yet its composition reflects a different balance than before. The absence of Livyatan does not erase its influence. The traces it leaves behind, in fossils and in the patterns of interaction preserved within the record, continue to inform an understanding of the period in which it existed. Its presence, followed by its disappearance, marks a transition within the history of marine life, illustrating how even dominant predators are shaped by the systems they inhabit. Through this quiet vanishing, Livyatan becomes part of a broader narrative, one where change is constant and survival depends on alignment with conditions that are always in motion. The ocean moves forward, carrying with it the memory of forms that once defined its character, even as they give way to new expressions of life. The present ocean carries echoes rather than replicas, forms that resemble what came before, yet move within a different arrangement of life. Among these echoes are the modern sperm whales, distant relatives of a lineage that once produced hunters of immense capability. Their bodies retain certain structural similarities: the elongated skull, the deep capacity for sound, the endurance required for long journeys. Yet the role they occupy has shifted into something quieter and more specialized. Today, sperm whales descend into the depths, pursuing prey that exists far below the reach of sunlight. Their feeding strategies rely on precision and timing within a vertical landscape where darkness defines the environment and sound becomes the primary means of navigation. This approach contrasts with the earlier patterns suggested by their ancient relatives, whose interactions occurred within a different context, one shaped by encounters with large-bodied animals in more open regions of the ocean. The absence of whales that hunt in the manner of Livyatan reflects a broader transformation within marine ecosystems. Predators still exist, and some reach impressive sizes, yet their roles tend to be more clearly defined and less overlapping than in the past. Species occupy niches that reduce direct competition, each adapted to a particular set of conditions that guide their behavior and distribution. This separation creates a structure where interactions are more regulated, influenced by boundaries that limit the frequency of direct encounters between large predators. Sharks, toothed whales, and other marine hunters continue to move through the ocean, each following patterns that align with their specific adaptations. Some rely on stealth within particular regions, others on endurance or coordinated behavior. Yet these strategies often operate within distinct layers or environments. The overlap that once brought multiple large predators into frequent contact appears reduced, replaced by a system that distributes activity across different spaces. This reorganization contributes to a sense of stability within the modern ocean. Energy continues to flow through the system, Yet it does so along pathways that are more consistent, shaped by relationships that have settled into enduring patterns. While change still occurs, it tends to unfold within a framework that maintains a degree of balance, allowing species to persist within roles that are less likely to shift dramatically over short periods. The difference between these conditions and those of the Miocene becomes apparent through comparison of structure rather than scale. The presence of large animals alone does not define the character of an ecosystem, but the way in which those animals interact. In the earlier ocean, multiple large predators shared similar spaces and prey, creating a network of interactions that was more fluid and, at times, more intense. In contrast, the modern ocean reflects a distribution that limits such overlap, guiding species into roles that reduce direct competition. This shift influences not only predators, but also the species they interact with. Prey populations move within an environment where threats are more predictable in their nature and location, allowing patterns of behavior to stabilize over time. Migration routes, feeding grounds, and breeding areas align with conditions that remain relatively consistent, supporting the continuity of life across generations. What remains today, then, is not a diminished ocean, but one that has settled into a different arrangement. The forms of life it supports continue to reflect the processes of evolution and adaptation, yet the relationships between those forms have taken on a structure that contrasts with the earlier period. The memory of that past persists within fossils and within the traits carried by modern species, offering a connection between what once existed and what remains. In this continuity, the ocean holds both presence and absence, a system shaped by transitions that have refined its structure over time. The legacy of earlier predators lingers not as direct descendants of behavior, but as part of a broader lineage that continues to evolve within a world that has grown more defined in its balance. Equilibrium does not arrive as a sudden calm, but as a pattern that gradually settles into place, shaped by countless interactions that have found a more stable arrangement. In the present ocean, this equilibrium reveals itself through structure, a distribution of roles that guides how life moves and interacts across vast distances. The complexity remains, yet it is organized in a way that reduces direct conflict among the largest participants. Predators continue to occupy the upper levels of the system, yet their presence is often separated by habitat depth or preferred prey. This separation creates boundaries that limit the frequency of direct encounters between species that might otherwise compete for the same resources. Each predator operates within a range that aligns with its adaptations, following patterns that reduce overlap and allow for a more consistent flow of energy through the ecosystem. These distinctions extend across different layers of the ocean. Some species remain near the surface, moving along routes shaped by temperature and food availability, while others occupy deeper regions where conditions differ significantly. This vertical and horizontal distribution organizes activity in a way that supports coexistence, allowing multiple large predators to exist without constant interference. The system becomes one of alignment rather than collision, where interactions occur within defined contexts. The clarity of these roles contributes to a sense of continuity. Prey species move within patterns that reflect predictable pressures, adjusting their behavior in response to threats that are consistent in form and location. Migration routes, feeding grounds, and breeding areas develop in relation to these patterns, creating cycles that repeat with relative stability. This predictability supports the persistence of species across generations, reinforcing the structure of the ecosystem. Energy flows through this system along pathways that are more evenly distributed. Producers, consumers, and predators remain connected, yet the relationships between them are shaped by boundaries that reduce the intensity of direct competition at the highest levels. This distribution allows resources to be accessed in a way that supports a broader range of species, maintaining balance across the system. The presence of apex predators remains significant, yet their interactions are less concentrated than in earlier periods. Each operates within its own domain, influenced by specific environmental conditions and prey availability. While overlap does occur, it is often limited in scale or duration, reducing the likelihood of sustained competition between the largest hunters. This arrangement reflects a shift from the earlier pattern where multiple large predators shared the same spaces more frequently. Within this framework, the ocean maintains its dynamic nature while exhibiting a form of stability that supports continuity. Changes still occur, influenced by climate, currents, and biological interactions, yet these changes often unfold within a system that absorbs variation without losing its overall structure. The result is an environment where balance is maintained through the distribution of roles rather than the absence of complexity. The difference between this state and the earlier ocean becomes evident through the nature of interactions. Where once multiple large predators converged upon similar prey within overlapping territories, now those interactions are more distributed, shaped by distinctions that guide movement and behavior. This does not diminish the presence of predators, but redefines how they exist within the system. Through this arrangement, the ocean takes on a character that feels more ordered, where the intensity of direct competition at the highest levels has eased. The interactions that remain continue to shape the system, yet they do so within a structure that supports coexistence rather than constant confrontation. In this way, balance emerges not as stillness, but as a sustained alignment of relationships, where each species moves within a framework that allows the system as a whole to persist. Memory settles into the earth in fragments, not as a complete story, but as traces that endure long after the moment has passed. Beneath layers of sediment, within stone, shaped by pressure and time, the outlines of a different ocean remain preserved, offering a quiet record of a period when survival carried a different weight. These remnants do not speak loudly, yet their presence suggests a world shaped by constant negotiation between life and the forces that challenged it. In that earlier ocean, scale did not guarantee security. The largest bodies moved through waters where their size drew attention as much as it offered protection, creating a condition where strength and vulnerability existed together. Encounters between large animals were not rare interruptions, but part of a broader pattern that defined how life unfolded. Each movement carried the possibility of interaction, and each interaction carried consequences that could alter the course of survival. Livyatan stands within this memory as a representation of that environment, not solely for its size or capability, but for the role it played within a system shaped by intensity. Its presence reflects a time when the boundaries between predator and prey were tested repeatedly, where the distinctions between safety and risk were less clearly defined. Through its existence, it becomes possible to understand how the ocean once operated under conditions that differ from those observed today. The traces left behind by such creatures extend beyond their physical remains. Patterns of injury preserved in fossilized bones, distributions of species across ancient sediments, and the structures of ecosystems inferred from these records all contribute to a broader understanding of that period. Together, they form a mosaic that reveals how life responded to the pressures of an environment where competition and predation were deeply intertwined. As time progressed, the conditions that supported this intensity began to change. Climate shifts, alterations in ocean circulation, and transformations in the distribution of prey introduced new dynamics that reshaped the structure of the ecosystem. These changes gradually moved the ocean toward a different arrangement, one where interactions became more defined and less concentrated among the largest predators. The system did not lose its complexity, but it reorganized into a form that supported a more stable balance. The ocean that exists today carries forward the legacy of those changes. Its inhabitants reflect the outcomes of processes that have unfolded over millions of years, each adaptation shaped by the conditions that followed. While the forms of life have evolved, the underlying continuity remains, linking the present to the past through a shared history embedded within the earth. Yet the memory of that earlier ocean persists, held within the evidence that lies beneath the surface. Each fossil, each mark upon bone, each pattern within sediment contributes to a deeper understanding of how life once existed within a system defined by different constraints. These records invite a perspective that extends beyond the present, revealing a continuity that connects moments separated by vast spans of time. In considering this memory, it becomes clear that the ocean is not a fixed entity, but a system that evolves, responding to changes that alter its structure and the relationships within it. The period represented by Livyatan reflects one expression of that system, a configuration shaped by conditions that no longer exist, yet remain accessible through the traces left behind. Through these traces, the past remains present in a subtle way, offering insight into the forces that have shaped the ocean across time. The evidence endures, not as a complete narrative, but as fragments that, when considered together, reveal the contours of a world where survival required constant adaptation, and where even the largest forms of life moved within an environment defined by uncertainty.